Good morning. It is 7:07 after the hour. You are listening to the Eric Vaughn Show. And my name is Jermaine Reed, and I have the pleasure of being in the studio with a lot of great people this morning. Keon, the greatest engineer in the city. How you doing this morning, Keon?
Big brother, you so sweet.
I thought you were actually older than me.
No.
I'm 42.
Yeah, you old man.
Oh, see.
Yeah. I'm a young whippersnapper.
All right. Well, that's
Young
Keon.
great.
You sounded better than you did yesterday, so just glad you're here this morning,
Sir.
feeling well.
Better, yeah.
And then we have the blacksmith himself, Dr. Ramell Smith. He's our psychologist in the room, going to give us some mental health support this morning.
Milwaukee.
Good morning, Dr. Smith. And we have Dr. Daryl Davidson, who is the city health manager, correct?
Men's health.
Men's health. You focus strictly on men's health.
My area is men's health, and please call me Daryl.
Oh, Daryl. Okay. Okay, my friend. We're friends. And all of us in here are friends of Eric Vaughn, and we have worked closely with Eric Vaughn, particularly around issues related to men's health. So this is a very special moment for us. And then we have the queen in the house today. We have Ella Dunbar. How are you, Ella?
I'm great, thank you, Jermaine. Good morning. How are you?
Now, you are a manager over at SDC's Wellness.
That's correct. I'm a manager of the Health, Wellness, and Supportive Services Division at the Social Development Commission, where Mr. George Hinton is the CEO.
Wonderful. We know George. He's a great guy. And as a matter of fact, we were just talking about SDC and that you all had brought in Dr. Joy DeGrew a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about cognitive dissonance a few minutes ago, thanks to Daryl. But I will share this with the with Eric's audience today, is that you and I and Daryl, we had worked on Brain, Brawn, and Bodies, their men's wellness, health and wellness summit back in 2015.
Absolutely. My relationship with Brain, Brawn, and Body is one of my proudest moments. And even when Eric was coming up with the ideas for what the focus would be, sometimes we would talk about just dreaming. This is what it could look like. This is what it could look like. I remember he came to one of our Men's Health Referral Network meetings about 5 years ago, and he did a presentation, and people looked at him like he was out of his mind because we had never seen anything like that before.
Okay.
And I had promised him, I said, if we can get this thing off the ground, I'm there with you, man. So whatever you need. So that included, writing articles as well as getting some support from people in the community, looking for people who could subscribe to it, which I'm encouraging everybody out there to keep doing. Subscribe to Brain, Brawn, and Body.
Yes, keep that legacy,
Getting on the planning committee for the events and speaking and doing brother to brother and all sorts of creative activities that initially were for the African-American male in Milwaukee, but near Eric's passing, our constant conversation was about taking this thing national, so getting people around the country to really experience what this was all about. It was a beautiful thing.
Oh, that's great. And so we do want to pay homage and reverence to such a great man who has impacted so many people's lives, and to all of you who yesterday showed up for the celebration of life service of Eric. I'm sure the family is in agreement with me when we say thank you for your support. Thank you for everybody who has reached out to Faith and the grandchildren, to the daughters, to the siblings, just everybody who was immediately connected biologically and through marriage to Eric. We just want to say thank you to the WNOV family for all that they're doing to support this community, to keep us connected and help us through this grieving process. We would like to say thank you to the management, Mr. Joe Jones, and to Sandra Robinson, and to just everybody who has been concerned in supporting one another, because this has been and will be a journey that is to some degree familiar, but yet also unfamiliar. So we want to say thank you. And certainly as we offer our Ask the Doctor segment today on the Eric Vaughn Show, we will be talking about, for the first hour, about how to improve health outcomes for black men and men of color, and that was something that Eric was certainly passionate about. And, we talked to Sister Iyanla Vanzant the other day, and she was talking about how we can continue the legacy, through this grieving process, putting into motion. And so that's what we're doing. We want to honor by doing things that we know that our brother loved. And so I'm sure he would approve of this conversation today. The second half, or the second hour, we'll be talking about black men and suicide. And we typically in our community don't have an open page conversation or discourse about black men and suicide. But according to the CDC report 2010, 2011, 2009, 2011, 2013, suicide is the third leading cause of death among African-American men between the ages of 15 and 24. That's in the prime of their life. And so we're going to be having that open conversation. Important stuff this morning. So if you would like to join the conversation, please feel free to call 414-444-5250. Now, you got to let us get into the thick of it first before you call so we can lay the foundation. But certainly we want to hear from friends and family about this very important topic of men's wellness and health. So I think that's a good intro right there. I don't know. I don't have a history in broadcasting, but I'm learning as I go. And I want to say thank you to Eric Vaughn, because he really motivated me to get into broadcasting and with the Fresh Start Today show that comes on Wednesday. But when Eric gave me the opportunity to sit in his chair, in his seat, and to host his show on several mornings over the course of the last year, it certainly was a teaching moment, but there was a lot of pressure that came with it because Eric's shoes are big, and Eric has his own way of presenting and talking, and people love Eric. So I didn't know if they was going to love me like they love Eric. So, but you all were kind to me, and I want to say thank you. The last 2 pieces of hair that I had on top of my head, you all spared me those, so thank you.
Well, grass doesn't grow on a busy street, so you're doing just fine.
So that's great. So again, if you want to join the conversation on men's health, we'll be taking your calls at 414-444-5250. So let's talk about Eric's vision with brain, brawn, and body first. What do you know about that, Daryl?
I always go back to knowing that men had, the term is disproportionate, they had a disproportionate number of chronic illnesses and ultimately death, a lower life expectancy, because of so many different factors. Specifically, black men were the ones who we hear about in the news who were going through employment problems or experiencing lower education, which leads to lower levels of health literacy. And if those combinations are there, often you would have a person who shows up with no insurance, health insurance, and they may not have a relationship with the healthcare system. They end up going to see a doctor when there's pain. That doctor is typically the emergency room physician. Mm-hmm. So what do you have? You have a person who's not only showing up in pain, but they're probably showing up when there's a chronic illness or a chronic disease. Now, can they afford the medication? Can they afford the time to treat that particular condition when they know they need to find a job and feed their family or keep the lights on? Those are the types of things that challenged a lot of African-American men and ultimately have led to the data and the statistics that we've seen. So when you talk about stress, you talk about higher cases where you'll see heart disease and then ultimately heart attack and stroke. Those types of things are a part of it. But even when you're looking at middle class and upper middle class African Americans, people you assume to be affluent, they have the same type of issues because they still deal with being black. They still dealing with stressors constantly, or this pressure to believe I have to show up and look exemplary. Therefore, if I do something wrong, it represents something that happens to the entire race, and all these types of things that pressure a person into illness.
Okay.
So we need to address mental health just as we do physical health.
And so there is this belief and research and data out there, Daryl and Ella, that talks about black men don't go to the doctor in comparison to other races, and particularly women are 2 times more likely to go to the doctor than black men. So is it true, first of all, that black men aren't going to the doctor? And then the deeper question for me is the why behind it.
I think that the black males are going to the doctor, but not as frequently as they should. And I think that accounts for some of the late diagnosis and health outcomes. I have to say that with the social issues that black males experience, it's a lot of stress, and as Daryl mentioned, the stressors are there, and that means that we have to meet people where they are and address the issues that are priorities to them, because that's what they are addressing first. And I know at the agency where I work, at the Social Development Commission, we look at addressing the issues that are affecting individuals that can prevent them from going to the doctor, that can prevent them from taking care of themselves. They have to have those issues addressed. They need the employment training. They need the issues that are affecting their family as a whole. And when those issues are addressed, you will see black males going to the doctor more frequently. And when they have the jobs that have the health insurance, they can be equipped to go to the doctor and feel comfortable and not having to worry about expenses.
Gotcha.
Because that's one thing that some individuals may worry about. Am I going to have this expense? And having the health insurance coverage, having a full-time job will take care of that.
Well, Dr. Davison, can you briefly, and then we may have to finish this on the other side of the break, but is it true that black men aren't going to the doctor to the same rate that other folks are, and what is the why behind that from your perspective?
Black men, but men in general, aren't going to see the doctor, starting off with something really basic, which is biology. Women have a menstrual cycle. So there's been the socialization and the common practice of women talking about health with their daughters and with their nieces and with young girls at an earlier age, because they're letting them know to expect that type of thing, and then taking them to a specific doctor so they can be clear on what health looks like. So beginning then, at a very early age, preteen and teen, they have a relationship with their doctor.
So we're going to pick this up on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Eric Vaughn Morning Show. And Maria, we see your call. We're going to take your call in a minute. We'll be right back. It's 7:24 in the morning. You're listening to the Eric Vaughn Show. This is your host, Jermaine Reed, and we have in the studio with us Dr. Ramell Smith, Dr. Daryl Davison, and Ella Dunbar, and Keon, the engineer. Maria, you are on the Eric Vaughn Morning Show. Do you have a quick question or comment?
Actually, I have a comment.
Turn your radio down, please.
Wait, sorry, let me turn it off. I'm sorry. One of the challenges, I believe, with the health in African-American men, and I know Eric speaks about this all the time, Daryl speaks about this all the time, is really the emphasis on preventative medicine. So African-American men present to emergency rooms, they present to their doctors when there is an issue, when there is chronic illness, as opposed to preventative health care. When it's time to go for just an annual checkup, a colonoscopy, and taking care of their prostate, it's at a chronic level, and it's not at the beginning.
Gotcha.
So, I see this. I saw this in my father. He went to the doctor when something hurt, when something wasn't wrong. He didn't go for his preventative medicine until he was told that he had to go every year, or, he might have a heart attack, or he had cancer. So that's just my comment in terms of not only preventative medicine, but preventative activities, drinking water, exercising, and walking. The Men's Health Walk, I was so proud with them in organizing that and making sure that they understand that if you have to go and work, if you have to take care of your family, you're responsible why, do I have time to do this? Do I have time to exercise? Do I have time to make sure that I drink enough water? And Daryl is right. African American women, we speak to our daughters about this at an early age. Do we also put that emphasis in raising our sons and doing the same thing?
Thank you, Maria, for that very important comment.
Wow.
So, Dr. Davison, I know you say I can call you Daryl because we family, but I just like Dr. Davison, too, because of this conversation. Folks who may be tuning in today and they need to know who's at the table and what their qualifications are to have this conversation. But we're talking about barriers to men engaging in preventive or even routine medical care. And some traditional barriers that I ran across was distrust of the healthcare system, masculine role. That some folks even feel that is kind of weak to go to the doctor because we as men, we're in control. So as Maria indicated, that we don't go until it hurts or we're in pain or we're in the emergency room. And sometimes the wife or the lady friend has to drag us in there. But another thing is lack of insurance and then the fear of being diagnosed with something.
Well, I use the phrase the terrible twos. So when men are in their teens and 20s, they're too strong. And when they're in their 30s and 40s and early 50s, they're too busy. And when they're in their 60s, they're too scared. So, right, it's too late then. So I look at those terrible twos as being something that we need to monitor. That question about what's going on with men, we have to normalize having conversations about health, consistent conversations about preventive health. It can't be, I'm going to show up when there's pain, because here's when men show up when there's pain when they're in their 20s, when they have an STD.
Wow.
That's when they show up. So what happens then? Well, you get what's called a results treatment. There's no more pain because you got a medicine. There's a result. You're not coming back. So there's no real relationship there. We're asking people to not only have those conversations early, because then they'll be able to have appropriate questions for their doctor too. They'll be able to say the words, well, I know what my body feels like normally. Okay. My healthy body does not ache here. My healthy body feels good in my stomach after I eat. Now, the key concern about the masculine role that you just brought up, Jermaine, I will admit, typically people will say that's what goes on with men in their head. They have to be strong. They can't admit that there's pain, things like that. But we also know this. If somebody is hiding their pain, by the time they admit it, they may not be able to walk or they may not be able to breathe. I mean, by the time you find out how serious that pain is that they're ignoring, it is too late. And that's why we want to put that serious message out there. Have a relationship with your doctor. Do those preventive activities. If you were smoking, don't smoke. As a matter of fact, the City of Milwaukee Health Department Men's Health Group is hosting men's smoking cessation classes at the Center Street Library starting next week, starting on Tuesday. It's a series of classes, 8 sessions. The American Lung Association has a curriculum. That's what they're following. It does work. You can call this number, 286-6756, if you want to get into that class. But different types of things that make you bring on good habits. Exercising, getting enough rest, eating less red meat. So I didn't say don't eat any at all, but eating less red meat than, like a big plate full of steak or something. Eating more green vegetables, eating foods with colors, eating leafy vegetables, as well as drinking more water. Sure.
So let's look at the not SDC. Oh, I don't know, STD.
Let me look at SDC.
SDC. Right, I want to say the Center for Disease Consider, the CDC. You all forgive me this morning. But
the Center for Disease Control
and Prevention.
Prevention. So there's a report in 2013 indicated that some of the leading cause of death for black men, particularly from the ages of 1 through 14, unintentional injuries is one. And then number 2 is homicide from ages 1 through 4, 5 through 9 is cancer. And then from 10 through 14 is homicide. when we start looking at some serious disease-related, and I don't want to say disease because suicide is one of these, and that could be related to mental illness. So I don't want to just say that, that diseases are just physical versus mental. So from the ages of 35 through 44, heart disease is the leading cause of death. 35 through 54. So we're talking about a 19-year span history. And you're fairly young then. From 55 through 64, cancer is the leading cause of death. And then from 65 plus, heart disease. So when we look at these type of diseases, when you start talking about the top 3 diseases for black men, between the ages of, let's go back to 15 through 24, you have homicide, unintentional injuries, suicide. Then number 4 comes in at heart disease. So heart disease just keeps coming up, and it's something that plagues the life of African American men from an early age, even being number 4 in your teens that you could be. And I don't never associate black males and teenage black males with having heart disease. How common is that?
Well, now we're seeing it more because you have higher levels of obesity among teens. And what you're really talking about is the blood getting through the body with oxygen in an effective manner. I mean, it's kind of a simple concept when you think about it. So what is making it not happen? Is it because you have a blockage? What is causing the blood not to go through the body? I mean, if you're looking at a water hose, for example, if the water hose has a lot of things blocking it, it could be on the sides of the hose, on the inside of it, then that would be an example of it would build up too much pressure in the water hose to get the water out. So the water is still going through, but it takes more pressure to get it through a smaller area. The inflexibility of the water hose, or in this case, the blood vessel, that may be something too. And what causes that? Well, it could be the food that people are eating. It could be sedentary lifestyle. People aren't walking and exercising, as Maria had stated earlier. What she's letting you know is people should get 30 minutes a day of exercise. They should get that heart beating.
30 minutes a day.
You should get 30 minutes a day where your heart is beating. At least. You should. Because, and that has been demonstrated to even influence a better life expectancy for people who say, well, this runs in my family. So, yes, your blood pressure will begin to consistently change with consistent healthy exercise and the other things, which are the eating and the not smoking.
Now we have Thomas on the Eric Vaughn Morning Show. Thomas, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Go say something.
Hello?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, speak up a little bit more for me.
Okay. One of the things that we tend not to do, because we think that we're invincible, and that we think that, well, it happened to someone else, but not to me, which nothing could be further from the truth. Man was not made to sit still. Okay? Let's get that right on the table. We were made to move. We were made to walk. And by doing so, we increase the chances for our blood to flow into the heart and into the various blood vessels throughout our body in order for us to function normally. And there was a study that was done a while back that said that we are between 15 and 20 pounds heavier than we were in succeeding generations, which is unfortunate because now we have to make things bigger than before. And I can remember a time when we were in a health fad where if you were looked upon as fat or chubby, you were frowned upon. Now it's becoming more fashionable. I guess that's my comment.
All right. Thanks a lot, Thomas, for tuning in and sharing that with us today. If you'd like to join this conversation, we're talking about how we're going to improve health outcomes for black men and men of color on the Eric Vaughn Show with your guest, host, Jermaine Reed, and then we have in the studio with us Dr. Ramell Smith, Dr. Daryl Davison, and Ella Dunbar, as well as Keon. So let's go back to these traditional barriers. We talked about distrust. We talked about lack of insurance, the masculine role, lack of insurance, fear of being diagnosed with something can prevent us from going to the doctor when we have that pain, that ache, or whatever. And we have to listen to our bodies because our bodies will speak to us. You're right.
Well, I also want to add in, historically, the hospital was the place where people died. That's how a lot of black people thought about it.
It's the truth in a sense.
You go in, you don't come out, right?
Right.
So,
and I ain't gonna call this particular hospital around here, right? No, where my daddy died.
Right. So
see, there you go.
So we are completely aware. So I wanted people who are in the audience to know we get it. We hear people. We see what's going on. That still doesn't mean you don't have a relationship with your doctor.
Okay.
That still doesn't mean that you don't go to events and opportunities where you can get your blood pressure checked. I'll give an example. Again, City of Milwaukee Health Department, that's where I work. If you go to the men's health centers at, there's one 23rd and Mitchell at the Southside Health Center. There's another one near 36th and Fond du Lac. That's the Keenan Health Center. And there's another one, 7630 West Mill Road. That's the Northwest Health Center. And tomorrow they are having an open house for the community. It's a family health day. Okay. So from 10 to 4, everybody who wants to go there, men, women, children, you can go up there. Immunizations, check your blood pressure, check your cholesterol, check your blood sugar. You can go to these places and it doesn't cost you anything, and you don't need health insurance. And we have a community health access program that will sign you up for health insurance if you don't have it. So it's available. Maybe part of the issue is not putting the information together. I know we say a lot of stuff and we're saying it in a short period of time, but see somebody who knows this information. Go to, let's say, the health department or call the health department at 286-8620 and find out if they can help you. This is all public health. We want this city to be a healthy city, but it's not going to happen unless the public comes to see us too. We go out there, but we can't see everybody. Some people are going to have to call us, and we're still going to see you. Even non-traditional hours. We do immunization clinics until 7 o'clock at night on some evenings, so please come in.
So that's some really important stuff. You know, so the issue, some people will say, okay, I don't have insurance. You just mentioned several places where they can get free medical care or medical services, right?
Yes.
Okay, and in addition to that, there's Bread of Healing Incorporation. There's Outreach Community Health Center on 210 West Capitol Drive. You have Angel of Hope on the south side. Open Door Free Clinic. So there are some free medical clinics that are open to the public, but it goes back to me, the why aren't we accessing, whether that's because we don't have the information, but even when we have the information, and this is we're going to shift into this other barrier that we don't have an open discourse about, but there's something that Dr. Dorothy Roberts refers to as race-based medicine practice. Race runs deep in the medical practice, even in terms of when you walk into a doctor, they want to know what your race is, you know. And so what she talked about is how diagnosis and treatment and measurements and all that stuff can be influenced, and often is, even from prescriptions, is influenced by race. So let's for a minute talk about the differential response or the racial care gap that occurs in medical practice. Now, okay, go ahead, doctor.
Well, I'm going to start off with you're saying that occurs, and I'll even go further and say that is about to occur, because there's a recent report that is expressing that there are fewer African-American males who are applying to medical school. So, I mean, there's already been a disproportionate number who are being accepted, but now it's a lower number who are applying. And so going back to what you were just describing, all of those different reports that stated if you have a relationship with your doctor, it usually is going to be much more effective when you have things in common and you can talk about everything. Well, the fact is, if a person doesn't believe they can talk to you, or you don't believe you can talk to them or ask specific questions, then you're not going to get the health care that you need. And the data is showing that fewer African Americans are getting referred to specialists, which is a lot of times what they need. We also see that African American males and African Americans in general, they don't really clearly understand what the specialties are either.
Right.
So,
right.
like a doctor is a doctor is a doctor.
The general internalist.
Right. It's like everybody is the
versus,
same. It's like they all have a basic type of the same education. So I'll just see that one person, and that's
versus
my
a
doctor.
cardiologist versus
But I can tell you right now, and I'll use an example from one of the health centers where one of my staff saw someone who kept saying, I already saw somebody, but the person who they saw was looking for, let's say, a sexually transmitted infection, and the person who they're in front of is asking them about blood pressure. Mm-hmm. One is looking for one thing, and someone else is looking for something else, and this individual is saying, well, I've already been checked. So it goes back to, if you have a clear understanding of what are the things I should know about me. There's screening schedules. In my 20s, what's my blood pressure? In my 30s, what's my blood pressure? Mm-hmm. Your doctor can tell you, if you've been seeing them all this time, this looks unusual. That's part
because
of the
many
reason.
of us don't even know the number, let alone what is unusual.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And
what's normal? What's normal?
I go back to individual relationship, because let's face it, you can talk about what's happening in general and like these data tables and charts, but it's really going to be based on what does your doctor know about you and your family history. Yes. And everything else that you have told to him or her. And so like this month is Prostate Cancer Prevention Month. There's a lot of debate on, well, should this person see this person, when they're 40? Should this person see this person when they're 45? Have a relationship with your doctor and tell them, this is what's happening to the men in my family, my father, my brother, my uncle. And your doctor will say, you need to get this at this time.
Right. For example, my father had colon cancer, and so I needed to start having screenings at 35.
Exactly.
Versus at 40. But if you don't, and that's what understanding your family's history is really important too. And sometimes we lose that, and particularly if men aren't going to the doctor and getting the right information, then we don't pass the right information down to our children, and that is so critically important.
And sometimes some family members may need to accompany a family member
system
to the doctor.
Yes.
And advocate for them.
Right.
And make it an interactive conversation that they're having with their doc, and have some takeaways.
Okay.
And there's also the option of, if you're not comfortable with your doctor, you're not building a relationship, maybe you need to change to another physician or to another site. And so you can get more out of it.
Got you.
So you have takeaways that you can implement.
Al, we see your call. We'll get to you in just 1 second. I want to kind of go back to this whole piece around race-based medicine or differential treatment response. Now, let me just read something. In the 1840s, Dr. James Marion Sims was a surgeon in South Carolina. He flatly refused to administer anesthesia to slave women and girls during surgical procedures. He cited the popular belief that blacks do not feel pain in the same way as whites. Now, let's fast forward 176 years to 2016. A new survey was done involving 500 people. 400 of them were medical students and residents. And what that study found is that African-American patients are often treated differently than white people when it comes to medical care. These implicit biases in medical students may explain why black patients are sometimes undertreated for pain, with some students believing that black people feel less pain and have thicker skin than white people. Is this a medical issue here or a sociological issue here? And where do these beliefs come from?
Well, I mean, what you just described, that definitely makes it a historical issue, for sure. I mean, the belief is rooted in non-fact and non-science.
Okay.
And if you at least take a look at what your studies are indicating, it's letting you know that there's a lot of misperception that's not being dispelled. They're not saying the words, this isn't true. You have to take time. I mean, part of it is sociological, because we do have differences in patterns of behavior and how the races are, but much of that is just because of how society was designed. In public health, we look at very specific things around population. We look at the frequency of whatever we're seeing. We look at patterns, and then we take a look at causes and events. And what you're talking about is a series of things that are caused by misbeliefs, misperceptions, and then sharing those misbeliefs and misperception across generations.
Dr. Harriet Washington's book called Medical Apartheid, she wrote, the experimental exploitation of African Americans is not an issue of the last decade or even the past few decades. Dangerous, involuntary, and non-therapeutic experimentation upon African Americans has been practiced widely and documented extensively at least since the 18th century. Dr. Ramell Smith, how do we address the legacy of malpractice, inequitable treatment, and distrust?
I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge it. We have to state that it's real. And I just want to put this out. This is Ramell Smith speaking, so don't put this on WNOV, Dr. Davidson, or anybody else, because when I think about this, it infuriates me. You know, we haven't really talked about the elephant in the room, which goes back to the legacy of slavery. And when we look at how our ancestors was treated, not even as people, first not even being considered a man, then 3/5 of a man, we see all types of atrocities. So going back to your question of why don't we go, there's a long legacy, but the legacy never stopped. So we can go all the way back into, the studies that you talked about, but there's things from the CIA where they've dropped bag of mosquitoes filled with yellow fever, where we've seen people admitted for broken bones get injected with plutonium, to check out different things. And we see all of these different things. But if we go back to 1920, there was a study by John B. Watson on this little kid trying to talk about classical condition, Little Albert. And what they did is they frightened this white kid with this white rabbit. They put the startling sound with it. And the reason why I say that is because that changed how they did a lot of different surveys and studies and whatnot. And they said, we cannot damage our people trying to figure out how to help them. But this happened in 1920. So we go back forward to 1932, where we all understand the very renowned syphilis Tuskegee experiment, which happened from 1932 to 1972, incidentally, the year I was born. So I can go back to the year that I was born, where I can say, wow, our government, who's supposed to help us, has now infiltrated us to use us as guinea pigs. But even if we fast forward now to 2016, we look at the epidemic and we talk about the FDA and the CDC, places we're supposed to trust. But these people are culprits inside of this whole investigation that we talk about. Because if you look at the continuing increase in something like autism, and you link that to the vaccines and MMR, this is happening not only in black populations but white populations, so it's getting a lot of notice. But if you look at the disproportionate rate of African American boys with autism, you see that there's still some cover-ups going on. That was a cover-up in 2004 in the CDC. So you say, why do we not trust? Because there's still reasons that we have from a clinical, from an ocular evidence standpoints to show that our government does not always have our best interests at hand.
All right, we're at the point we need to take a break, and then we're going to take Al's call right on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Eric Bond Show. We'll be right back. It's 7:54 in the morning. Today is Thursday, September the 15th. Hopefully everybody is driving safely, those who are out on the road getting ready for work. We are talking about how to improve health outcomes for black men and men of color, and Dr. Ramell Smith is in the studio along with Dr. Daryl Davison and Ella Dunbar. We have Al on the line. Al, do you have a question or comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to emphasize, you're talking about history, and everything that was said, especially by Dr. Smith, was very accurate. But we're not looking at what we do to our children. I coached high school sports for 49 years, both boys and girls. We emphasize health, eating healthy, exercise, etc. in our athletic programs. And in school, children have to take physical fitness classes, etc. But at the point they graduate, they become sedentary. With the advent of computers, that even emphasizes it even more. I have a grandson who's 6'5", 280 pounds. He played football up until he was in the 9th grade. I bought him a new computer, and that was the end of his athletic career. He's currently at the University of San Francisco in computer science, and his health has started to fall off because he does nothing but constantly spend all of his time on a computer. We don't emphasize enough young people carrying on some of the activities that we train them in schools, athletically and fitness-wise, to the point that that doesn't carry on. When people get out of high school, go to work, basically their job is their life, to a point that there's no emphasis on fitness. There's no emphasis on, so I'm talking about for men primarily. Women, they have all kinds of health products, beauty products, magazines, etc., always constantly emphasizing their body and beauty and what have you. But for men, there's very little.
Okay.
This is a social issue, media-wise and otherwise, that needs to be focused on in addition to everything else. The experiments that went on and the things that we were trained in the military and in professional sports that I participated in were about pain is not something that you deal with, it's something that you live with.
Okay.
And even now in professional sports, when a person is injured, how long does it take to heal a muscle or a joint or what have you? Within 2 to 3 weeks after the injury, they're back out there playing ball again or doing whatever. I just read in the paper this morning that Chris Bosh, who has a serious medical issue, declares himself eligible to play professional basketball again. And knowing that if he has another incident, such as the one that put him out, can kill him. But the game is more important. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Alpha.
Let me just say that, 'cause just to his point, there's an athlete, Hank Gathers, and it was the same exact kind of issue as what Chris Bosh almost is going through. It's a little different, but Hank has said, you know what, if I can't play this game, I almost rather be dead. He said, I know what the medication does to help me as a person, but it hurts me as an athlete, so I'd rather go out. And even his best friend at the thing said, when Hank Gathers had an alley-oop dunk, was running down the court, and that's when he had his last seizure, which ultimately led to his death. And his friend said, that's exactly the way he would want to go. And he wore that as kind of like a badge of honor. And I think that's some of the things where we have to correct in men, too. What is our real purpose? What's the real longevity? Because he had a little son. So understanding the totality of everything.
The baseball player.
Basketball player.
No, the baseball player who just retired about
Prince Fielder.
Yes.
Prince Fielder.
Yes. Similar situation, but made a different choice.
Yes.
He chose to live. You know, we have Susan on the line. Susan, do you have a question or comment?
I have a question. My question, I don't understand, what is the difference between smoking and vaping? I see a lot of young kids with these vape sticks. I don't know what they're called, but what is the difference between the two, and do they have the same deleterious side effects?
All right, Susan, thank you for calling. We'll get that question answered.
Thank you. So this is Darryl responding. So smoking, we're talking about traditional cigarettes, that's tobacco. So you're using tobacco, you're inhaling it, it goes into your lungs. Tobacco has nicotine in it, and it also has other products. Those products could be tar and it could be menthol if you're smoking the Cools and the Newports. And for sure, it has been proven that tobacco use, smoking, is going to eventually cause some problems in your body. So it could be emphysema or lung problems. It can lead to heart disease. It can also lead to cancer. So we don't necessarily know what it's going to lead to all the time, but it certainly is going to be injurious to your health if you are a consistent smoker. Now, when we're talking about vaping or the use of what's called an electronic cigarette, there's a nebulizer or there's an electronic device that is going to heat up a liquid in that product.
Sometimes catches on fire.
Right. Thank you, Ella. Right. So here's what the public health position is, and I'm going to stay with the public health position. The public health position is, because electronic cigarettes are recent, they're still being studied. There are debates on whether or not they are healthy or not. There is a movement that is looking into it because it's still a device that brings nicotine into the body. The nicotine is what is the addictive substance.
Okay.
And the reality is a person who is vaping is bringing more nicotine into their body than a person who is using cigarettes. So it's very likely if one is going from traditional cigarettes to electronic cigarettes, when they go back to traditional cigarettes, they're probably going to have to smoke more cigarettes to bring more nicotine into their body, which means you're probably doing something much more unhealthy than before. So the bottom line is this. For the people who are concerned about electronic cigarettes, they are studying it now. It's through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The research that's coming out is recent. We know that more high schoolers are using electronic cigarettes. You don't get the smell of tobacco on your clothes or on your body. Ella, I'll let you tell us what else is going on with them. But like I said, I'll give the public health position on it.
And I'd like to also add that in Milwaukee, we have the Wisconsin Tobacco Prevention Network that Lorraine Lathan coordinates. And at the Social Development Commission, we have that program integrated with our youth services program, and we educate the young people about what vaping does and, of course, what cigarettes do as well. And for the caller who would be interested in connecting with Tobacco Prevention Network prevention practices, I could connect her with Lorraine Lathan at the Wisconsin Tobacco Prevention Network. It's amazing. Some of the marketing is really what some of the young people look at when they first start with either smoking or with the electronic cigarettes.
Absolutely. Those groups like the Wisconsin Tobacco Prevention Networks, the Poverty Prevention, and Hispanic Latino, and African American and Native American, they all will address some of the key concerns that are making people believe they should be smoking. And Ella, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it's marketing. And it is a true addiction. Everybody who is smoking and wants to quit knows it's not just a matter of I'm going to quit. There is a chemical change in your body. Nicotine changes what your brain is doing, and therefore you're probably going to need some help. And that's why we have smoking cessation classes like the ones that are taking place next week, starting at the Central Library here in Milwaukee.
And that address,
right.
Phone number?
Right. So call that number, 286 is 414-286-6756. If you want to register for the smoking cessation classes. It's not going to be the only one. This is part of a series. So it's a series of 8 sessions. But at the same time, if you're not able to get into this first series, which is starting next week, you can get into another series and call that number, get on the waiting list. You won't have to wait too long. We will get you in there, and we are sure you will be better off. If you want to quit, you were determined to quit, you are very likely to quit if you go through a smoking cessation program and get support.
Call 286-6756. Ella.
And also at the Social Development Commission, we have counselors who can assist the young people. They can callers can call 906-2793 or 906-2794 at the Counseling and Wellness Clinic at the Social Development Commission.
So we need to change shifts here. We're going to start talking about the second topic that's going to cover this last hour, which is a really big topic in our community and one that we have to bring into a lot of intimate spaces. Along with the healthcare piece, we've somehow got to be able to get these conversations at the dinner table. We have to get these conversations at the barber shop. So I just gave a key. Barbers invite folks in to do presentations, informational sessions while folks are waiting to get their hair cut so we can get information out there. September is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, in addition to being National Prostate Screening.
Right. Prostate Cancer Prevention Month.
Yeah, Prevention Month. Not long ago, suicide in African Americans were almost never mentioned in the same breath. And that's what Sister Michelle Bryan, who did a phenomenal job yesterday in hosting the show, she talked about that. Despite confronting challenges from slavery to Jim Crow to structural institutional racism, blacks rarely took their lives from a historical standpoint. But somehow, some way, things have shifted. Things have changed. And you talked about the pressure of being black in the previous segment, Daryl. But again, according to a 2010 study that was done by the CDC, suicide was the third leading cause of death for black men between the ages of 15 and 24 in America. So we want to talk about why black men are killing themselves at such an alarming rate. Suicide and the conversation around suicide and mental illness are all taboo topics, but not talking about them is literally killing us. So we want to engage in this very sensitive conversation. So over the next hour, if you hear something that invokes some mixed emotions, you may want to step away from the computer or from the radio and just breathe, exhale, like Sister Iyanla Vanzant taught us the other day. Just breathe down to the deeper registers of your being, oxygenate your body, just step away. But it's an important conversation, and what better place to have this than over an airway that is reaching so many African Americans. A lot of folks who are listening to this program this morning, you know someone, whether it was a male or female, who have terminated their lives. I had an uncle who terminated his own life, and we never talk about it. So let's talk about this topic as it relates to suicide and black men. Dr. Ramell Smith, why is mental health so critical to our survival as black men?
Well, when you talk about mental health, I think we always have to look at it on a spectrum, because most of the time when people hear mental health, they think of mental illness. They think of somebody who's crazy, something that's wrong. So when we talk about mental health, we talk about it from a spectrum of mental wellness to mental illness. And as we talked about with our medical health, the more we can be more proactive, the more we can be more preventative, the more it helps us on that lesser end. So when you have a person where you can talk about it, so you understand, you know what, Darren said the best word in here, he said normalcy. So many people think about suicide, but they won't say it to anybody else because they're going to think that they're thought of as being weak or as weird or something's wrong with them, and then people are going to look at them and treat them differently, where many people have thought about it. Not everybody may not act upon it, but it's those thoughts. So you said, why is it so important? Because everything comes from our communication, our ability to talk. Because once we talk, you know what? Now we can have that action. We can have that motion to do those things that we need to do. So if we do those things from a medical standpoint, those are the things we talk about, the relations from the mind and the body. The more our body is in shape, the better our mind is, and vice versa.
Okay.
So we, just as we spend this much information on our body, getting in proactively to those people who can help us and who care for us, we want to do the same thing from a mental health aspect.
Now, depression, there's 6 million men who are treated for depression annually, and that's just the reported numbers. And one thing I've learned from you, Dr. Smith, over the last year or so is that reported numbers
always very
pale.
conservative.
Yes, they pale in comparison to the unreported numbers. So if there's 6 million men who are being treated for depression, and depression is a major risk factor for suicide.
The number one reason.
Okay, so talk to me about what is depression, and does depression look different in men versus women? Because if you're dating someone or you're married to someone and depression looks like this in women, and she's concerned about the well-being of her mate, and she's thinking depression looks like ABC, and maybe it's not looking like that for a man, and he could be suicidal and she don't even understand, or depressed and don't even talk to me.
Okay, well, when we talk about depression, you have two types. So you want to think about it. You have unipolar depression, and then you have bipolar depression. So when we talk about unipolar depression, the key word what we look at is what we call anhedonia. And anhedonia is basically the lack of pleasure of interest in something that once caused you to have a lot of pleasure. So when we talk about depression, we think about the person who's isolated, who's very quiet, who doesn't want to do, a lot of different things, the person who's sad, the person who cries, all of those kind of typical things. But now when we move it over over to a bipolar and you said it looks different, you say, wow, this person is very excited because now bipolar is the old manic depressive. So when we talk about bipolar, we talk about a mania that's associated with depression, and that's just the opposite. It's this crazy energy that you have, this crazy livelihood spirit. But the only thing is this mania is counterproductive.
Okay.
So when you talk about a person, if somebody tells me, hey, you know what, I wrote a book last night. I was like, well, how long was it? 300 pages? That sparks my attention. Because the average person is not writing a 300-page book. Now, you have a lot of this energy, but it's like, wow, what's going on with this? So when I look at a person who's like, you look at a person who's on drugs, and, we kind of make fun of it when a person's on ecstasy, and they're real wild on the dance floor, doing crazy things. We say, I know something's wrong with them. But when we look at that mania behavior, I look at people who go on these gambling sprees, when people go on these shopping sprees, these things that can initially increase the dopamine levels, the serotonin levels in your body to give you this level of excitement. But what it is this excitement, what they're doing that makes them look almost normal, is to an extra level of it. So sometimes when you say this person is depressed, it's not that they're sad and alone in the corner. They could be seemingly the life of the party, but that's another way in a cry for help. And so when we look at depression, we talk about being the number one reason for suicide, because when you have chronic depression, it leads to a state of hopelessness. And that's when suicide becomes an option, because you say, you know what, if I'm convinced in my mind that tomorrow is going to be worse than today, then what's the use of going on if today was the worst day of my life? Why should I just make it get better? And this goes into the mental wellness, how I think about things. And we talk about black men committing suicide. You know what the number one group that commits suicide is?
Probably elderly.
White elderly men.
Wow.
You know why? Because Darren talked about it before. He said, black men, we have all of this stress on us all the time. But if you're a white man, okay, heterosexual, Christian, you've had it easy throughout your whole life. So the first time when you get old, you get what? Now you're suffering from what? Ageism. You're being discriminated for the first time. And what we talked about, having all those resilient skills because we've had to deal with them from birth. Now this is the person who's been emotionally, socially rich their whole life. And now they're becoming emotionally bankrupt and they don't know how to deal with it. So now we take that back to our young black population. When I was in school, they told me I had a better chance of going to prison than I did to college. And now when we look at the generation now, we're looking at individuals who say, you know what? I'm probably going to get killed before I go to college. I'm probably going to go to prison if I don't go. So that means 2/3 of my options are negative. So 66% of the chance of my life is negative. So you know what? Forget about delayed gratification. It's top of the world. I'm doing everything I got to do now. And because I know tomorrow could be worse, this is what we had to think about, because sometimes we just think about suicide. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to put a gun to my head. I'm going to slash my wrist. I'm going to take these pills. I'm going to hang myself. But Sigmund Freud created a term called thanatos. And a lot of people sometimes say, a little thing with Freud and whatnot, because he had some theories that was a little off. But thanatos means the secret desire to kill yourself. Now, in our society, suicide can be very taboo. For some people with religious connotations, think it might take them into a hell. I'm going to take away from my family. People are going to think I'm weak. It's all of these things. So instead of me killing myself, you know what I'm going to do, Jermaine? I'm going to make you kill me. So we have suicide by cop. We have suicide by gang initiation. We have drunk driving. We have ODs. So these are all subtle soft sides of suicide. And that whole thanatos is the secret desire to die. And that goes back to chronic depression and hopelessness. When I don't believe there's any hope for the future, then you know what? There's really no reason for me to be there. So you know what? I'm going to live it up until that time.
So you talk about thanatos, the secret desire to die. Now, I want to quote something from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. James Causey wrote an article back in June 2013, and I quote, "Holding in pain, especially for young people living in violent communities, can lead to depression or post-traumatic stress disorder." So when I think about why black men killing themselves in their prime, at the heart of suicidal behavior is the strong desire to be free from suffering. And maybe that's where that thanatos kicks in. Whether that be from emotional, mental, and or physical pain. And a lot of young black men and men are carrying a lot of pain. We're under a lot of pressure. Is it possible that this surge in the number of black men who are killing themselves is related to us seeing the afterlife as a better place than the present life?
Oh, no doubt about it. Whenever, you're going to pain, you say, you know what, I don't know what's out there next. But you know what? It's got to be better than this, because some people believe they're living in hell already. So how much worse can hell be? So when we start to think about these young brothers out here, I'm going to disagree with you on one thing.
Okay.
When you say 15 to 24 is the prime of life, that's not the prime of life.
What's the prime of life?
When you start talking about your brain, we talked about this before, from just a brain development, your brain does not fully develop. We're talking about the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of your brain in your frontal lobe that controls your executive function. That's your problem solving, your rationale, your thinking. And that means that's when you really start to think and you can understand the reason why our 15 to 24-year-olds are committing suicide is because they don't have the cognitive resources. That's why this pre-education is so important. Once you get a little older, you have a few more resources to think about. You do have an understanding that things can get better. You do have different rationales, compensatory skills to deal with the pain and frustration you're going to. Working in the prisons for as long as I did, what you would see is young men who's crazy, wild, incorrigible, uneducatable, what they said. But as they got older, these were the wisest men. These were the guys that was kicking knowledge. And that's because, you know what? Now your brain got a chance to think. It got a chance to slow down. It got a chance to fully cook. We talked about this before. Some people like raw steaks, but I like mine well done. So if you give me one that's red, it ain't ready for me. And that's how the brain is. The brain needs time to cook. It needs time to develop. So when we have these young people doing it, it's because they don't have the cognitive skills. And I always say suicide happens. They talk about suicide is always one of these things is when you have these temporary problems, but you have a permanent solution. And the problem is you have these temporary problems, but you don't know how to deal with them, and you have fewer resources to think with. So you say, you know what, it's either life or death, instead of thinking, I can live, but let me talk with somebody. Let me get some help. Let me get some other resources. But now when you talk about this young generation, you say, you know what, I don't know my dad. This situation in my house is bad. I don't have anybody to talk to. I tried to talk to a couple people, it didn't work. Then it becomes much more of a seeable solution.
Well, I'm thinking about, and I appreciate that, and let me explain why I was referring to as being the prime. And I know you gave me the medical and all that, and that's why I love and I appreciate you. But let's go back to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, their stats, and that homicide is the number one leading cause of death, between 15 and 24. Accidents or unintentional injuries is number 2. Number 3 is suicide. So between 15 and 24, half of 15 is what? 7.5. Half of 24 is 12. So when you talk about phantosis, secret desire to die, and maybe that folks are creating situations where the police will kill them or somebody else kill them, the baby mama, girlfriend, whoever, kill them, or they kill themselves. When we look at those numbers and we reduce them in half, to me, that's saying that a large number of our African-American men are middle age, between the age of 7.5 and 12 years old. When we look at that number and let that sink in, that when your child is going to second grade, third grade, and fourth grade, if this trend continues, that they have lived half of their lives by the time they get to middle school. That should move us to action and look at this, because these numbers are telling. So that's why I was saying, the prime, and maybe not from a medical standpoint, but that it's a very important period in these folks' lives. And when we look at the number of folks who are black men who are killing themselves by whatever means, when we look at those numbers, a lot of that leaves, or it speaks to the number of fatherlessness, children whose fathers are no longer there permanently. So I know we have to take a break. We're going to come back. If you'd like to join this conversation, talk about black men and suicide on the Eric Vaughn Show, we'll be right back. You're listening to the Eric Vaughn Morning Show. I am your host, Jermaine Reed, and Keon is laughing at me because he caught me off guard. I was off into the music and forgot where I was at. I may be having a moment here. What's going on with me? Diagnose me, doctor. What's going on?
Okay, Keon need to tell the story. He got us all in there laughing.
So it's 8:23 a.m. on Thursday morning, September 5th. It is a lovely day outside, and we have some lovely guests in the studio, Dr. Ramell Smith, Dr. Daryl Davison, and Ella Dunbar. And we were just talking about black men and suicide. It's a very sensitive topic, and I know it's real heavy, and some folks don't want to start their morning off with it, but this was my opportunity to talk about it, so we wanted to bring it to the forefront, and we want to say good morning to our beloved sister, Queen Mother Faith. We love you. We're praying for you, and we're here in your corner. We're not going to go away. You belong to us. We belong to you.
May I say something also? Sure. Because you've taken in that direction, but Jermaine and everybody who's in the studio, that memorial service yesterday was magnificent, and I give tall credit to everybody who supported Eric's family, and the Beltons, and Tammy, and Homer, and everybody, all the speakers, the mayor, and Bevan Baker, and
Howard Fuller.
I mean,
it was just so many people.
Everybody who got up there, and when you look in that audience, and you realize, well, this is just a small version of Eric's friendships and audience and life. This is just a piece of it. Yeah. And you were talking about a crowded auditorium. That was beautiful.
And it was a celebration, a very positive atmosphere. It was a celebration.
It was.
And I think one of the reasons why when you lose somebody like Eric, whenever there's a loss, it's a hurt. But you got some warriors that they magnified the presence. So one of the things Dr. Fuller said at the thing, he was like, we all got to take up that mantle, and that was going back to Dr. Vanzant. So it's just I'd say that as a call to everybody out there listening. Hey, you know what? We all have to pick it up another notch. And that if we want to honor Eric, we can say we love him, but the best way we do it is we talked about motion. We got to do it. Love is a verb. We got to do it in our action. Right. Everybody take it up one notch.
And Eric was a motivator.
Yeah, he was. He was a motivator. He was a connector. He was a bridge. All those good things. So Iyanla Vanzant told us the other day, do 5 push-ups, 5 push-ups a day. So let's just do something, to honor him and remember him. And this conversation, we believe,
is 22 days. She said
for the next. I got 22 more days. Let me see.
Only 20 you've been doing them. I've been doing mine, Eric. I've been doing them. Add 5.
And don't forget to
do
subscribe
mine this morning,
to
but
Brain,
soon
Brawn, and
as
Body.
I get off the air, I'm doing my 5 push-ups
before we leave
correctly. So we're gonna do that today, man. We all gonna do our 5 push-ups. We love Eric, and we're going to do those push-ups in his honor. Now, let's get back, because we are going to be off the air soon, and we have a lot of territory to cover. So some of the risk factors I found out for suicide is males, high risk, elderly, folks in chronic pain, substance use and abuse, chronic illness, a person who has a lack of social support, poor response or unwillingness to engage in mental health treatment, having a friend or a family member that committed suicide puts you at high risk. And we also know that members of the armed force who have had multiple deployments within a short span of time are believed to be at high risk of committing suicide. So when we look at the high risk. Now, let me ask you something, Dr. Smith. Is there something different between just having the blues, Monday morning blues, versus having depression or chronic depression? How can you tell when it's not just the blues?
By the time that it lasts and by what we do, the one word I talked about was that anhedonia, that lack of pleasure, of interest in life. We all just said we were, saddened by the untimely loss, the unexpected loss of Brother Eric. But one of the things what we're going to do is to honor his memory. It's not go home and go to sleep, not go into the computer and just rest in our tears, but it's to be motivated to help our community even more. So when you start talking about blues, that's something we all go through. We all need a time to pause. I don't care how strong you are. Once you heard the news, you had to sit down. You were emotionally paralyzed for a minute. You had to digest it. It wasn't something that was easy. We had to take a step back. That's normal. That's good. But when you take a step back for a longer period of time than what we would expect for normal grieving, and we've all lost people before. You lose a father, you lose a mother, you lose a child, you lose a sibling, you lose a friend. We're all taken aback, and depending on the strength of that relationship, the longer it takes for us to get back. But it's a period of time where you say, you know what, I start to understand it's a new normal I have to establish. What I had with this person, the memories are always there, but I have to move on. So when you start talking about a blues versus a chronic depression, what we're talking about is the time it takes to get back up on your feet, doing those normal, regular things, going back to your job, going back to participating in activities. And that's why it's so important to have family and friends. Because when people ask, I said the main thing what I look for is changes and differences in a person. So if you love somebody, you're observing them, you're around them, you see. For example, my mom, she loves to shop. And when things stopped coming to her house from Amazon and from home shopping, I said, Mama, what's wrong? Because she on the phone. Now, she going to return it because she don't want all this stuff. But that's just her normal activity. She's not doing that. I understand. So for the people who we love, having that friend, having that family member, looking at them, observing, and then having the strength to say, hey, hey, something's not right. And when we talk about being uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable to talk about suicide. But let me tell you what, it's even more uncomfortable to have to bury somebody who's committed suicide.
So we have to have this
conversation. We
conversation.
have to have the conversation. We want to do it proactively because it's normal. I tell when I did counseling at Children's Hospital, the parent be like, well, I'm scared to talk about suicide because that might give them ideas. I said, listen, in this world, they already know about it. We've had children as young as 6 commit suicide, knowingly know what they're going to do because they've written letters to their parents about they were jealous of siblings or whatever the issues were. They were in foster care. They didn't like their life. So what we have to do is we have to talk about it and then give resources. And I know, Sister Ella, you were talking about some resources here in the city that we have.
Absolutely. And we need to start young with our young people, with our youth and our adolescents. It's hard for youth to process some of the strong topics that you just spoke of, Dr. Smith. And we have to nip it in the bud. And the parents and guardians need to bring our youth in and have them talk to, at SDC with our counselors, we have our clinicians who are state licensed, Susan Siegel and Patricia Edwards, who have a lot of experience of talking with young people and getting them to open up and help them to manage their situations, and it changes behavior.
Sharice, we see your call. We're going to take your call in just a minute. We're going to take your call. But Dr. Smith, you raised another point. 2 things that I want to respond to. One is, according to a study led by Dr. Jaffrey, that's Jaffrey, suicide in black children is on the rise. And this is a very recent study. So you talked about behavior. You're talking about, and that's relationship, monitoring those people that you love. What is their norm? What's normal for them? And when people are they're doing something that's a little different, we should ask questions. I was thinking about, the difference between suicide behaviors or depression in men versus women. Men have a tendency to act aggressively, when they are depressed. Now, here's another thing. Your sexual drive may be decreased, and that could be a sign of depression. So let me say this.
Unipolar depression, if you have a hyper increase in it, it could be a phase of the manic part of it.
So a woman can be in a relationship with a man. This is when you're watching behavior, and he's not sexually active or he don't have the desire to engage in sex, and she may take that personal or whatever, and it could be a symptom or a sign of him being depressed. So insomnia is another symptom of depression as well. Your sleeping pattern, either sleeping too long, interrupted sleep, not getting enough sleep, all those things can be signs. And if you're watching your mate and you're noticing they're not getting sleep, we got to start having questions and dig deeper into this and pull back the pages and the layers and have this hard conversation in safe places. Now, the other thing I want to say, when we talk about some of these risk factors or symptoms, these traumatic life events and the loss of a loved one, these life events, and Eric's passing was very traumatic for a lot of people, and particularly men who he connected with. He was a leader, a warrior among us. And so when Eric passed at 58, it made a lot of us just step back and look at our mortality and look at our health. And, but it also could influence us to go into a depressive state as well. And so we really need to talk to one another because we don't talk enough. We don't talk about what's on our mind. We wear these masks and we put on a smile because that's what's expected of us. But we have to create dialogue about how we're feeling about this loss that we've experienced. And that is why we're having this conversation this morning. I can tell that Dr. Daryl Davison has something he wants to share with the brethren.
I absolutely do. I think that you hit the nail on the head because Eric had our panel presentation. We used to do the traveling road show called Brother to Brother.
Yes.
And that was the reason why we did it.
Wow.
We did Brother to Brother because it was clearly established that men do not talk about health. They don't make the personal commentary around their health and share the information where it can inspire someone else to do it. And he made sure that it was not just an African-American male panel,
right,
but it was a diverse panel.
Yes.
And that's what I could appreciate. So you would have someone like me who has the public health background who would give the larger picture. And then you'd have another person who might talk about it from the clinical side. And then you have another person who give the testimony about their own challenges with health and maybe even how they conquered some of those challenges. But ultimately, it came back to we had a buddy system represented in that room. And it's similar to what we should be doing on a regular basis. You are so correct, Jermaine. We need to be having this conversation at the dinner table. Make it normal.
Yes. In black media, this has to be, because the reach is so far. We got to have it in the schools, in the churches, over the pulpit on Sunday morning.
And somebody needs to be clear when something is changing in your life.
Yes.
That they have the permission to talk about it.
Yes.
Because one of the problems that it seems that we have culturally has been this intense level of secrecy.
Yes.
Embarrassment or shame on the family and all these other things. And it'll be a problem that everybody in the world is having.
Well, let me ask this. Is the stigma around mental illness so huge and so great in our community that obvious signs are frequently overlooked or maybe even ignored or unidentified even by close family members and friends of that individual who has committed suicide?
I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's one of those things where it's like if you have a family member who's on drugs, sometimes you can see it forever, but you don't want to admit it. You can see them losing weight. You can see them, asking for money. You can see all of the telltale signs. You see those things. And it's the same thing with suicide. It's so uncomfortable, we don't know how to address it. And so that's what we talk about, normalization of this conversation. We have to talk about it. So I know some people saying, well, y'all go to the next subject.
Well, this is what I want people to do right now, because it's so important, because you're talking about we'd rather have this conversation on this side than on the back side. And we're looking over a casket. So what I want people to do for the next 10 seconds is just breathe. Let's just, like Sister Iyanla told us, to take it in. Let's breathe. And then we're going to exhale. One more time. Just breathe, take it in. Now let it out.
I was going to say for the drivers, keep your eyes open.
Please, and keep your hand on the wheels, please. Okay, we're going to take this call
when
from
you
Sharif.
breathe, when you inhale for 4 seconds, you exhale for 8 seconds. So it's a 1 to 2
So I didn't breathe correctly just
No,
then.
I'm just
Okay,
telling
we
you so
breathing. Okay.
Because you want the exhale to go slower. That's what calms the heart rate down.
All right, so y'all just got that. Sharice, you are on the Eric Vaughn Show. You have a question or comment? Thank you for holding.
Okay, no problem. My question is like, if you have like friends or family, when my dad was diagnosed with multiple system atrophy, it's like that situation triggered depression. And since it was a chronic condition, it was like it was never going away. So it's like, how can you like help your family? I mean, he wasn't suicidal; he passed away with the disease. But when it's a situation that's not going anywhere because they have a disease or I guess an injury or something like that, they're depressed and they admit it, but like what can family do, I guess, to help them with it? Because I work with people with physical disabilities, and when I meet the young men that have gunshots, they have spinal injuries and they're in a wheelchair or whatever. So what is it that can be recommended to the family or friends that say, I know they're depressed, but, what can I do about it to
All right.
get a break from that?
I think we got it. Thanks a lot, Sharice.
Thanks.
Stay tuned. Dr. Smith.
It's two things. If it's a chronic illness that's terminal in nature, we look at palliative care. And what palliative care is, we understand that the life is terminating and ending. So we get every possible resource from the home, from our social workers to your spiritual leader, everybody involved who can increase with the quality of life, doing everything that we can. So what we do is cater. But what this does is give the person attention. So oftentimes when people have chronic illness or terminal illness, they're alienated. They feel like they're alone. So what we want to do is make it as comfortable as possible. And that's not to say it's going to be great, but what you want to do is surround them with a lot of different comfort. And I said two things, but the second one really is love. What we have to do is we have to understand the importance of giving somebody a call, the importance of just going and reaching out, hanging out with somebody, doing the things that they can. But also the biggest thing when we have people who have those issues is to get them out to be able to help others, because they don't understand the motivation that they can bring and can inspire. When we look at some of the best motivational speakers, it's that person who comes out in the wheelchair, the person who has been terminally, has a terminal illness, but still has this inner resolve and resilience and strength, not to think of much as about me, but how I can use this to help others. And I say that in direct respect and honor to Eric, because we were talking about me coming on the show, and he wanted to talk about something that he referred to as Jonte Law. He was like, what do you know about that? And so I said, well, it's something that when it's the community thinks about we more than I. So whenever anybody thinks about individual success or individual complaints or needs, it's frowned upon by the community because it's all about we. And I think when we start talking to people who they say, woe is me, say, well, how can we use this illness? How can we use this to help others? And ironically, it's that serotonin that's uplifted. It's the reciprocal nature of helping that becomes a healing process for the person. So at first it seems as though, how can you ask somebody who's hurting to help someone? It becomes a healing nature to them.
Craig, you are on the Eric Vaughn Show. You have a question or comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to piggyback on what the good Dr. Smith was just saying, because that's why I was calling. I was going to ask him in reference to serotonin and, that whole component of a desire to want to reach out and help others. After my son died, I recognize that happened to me. It's been a difficult time. I won't deny that.
Yes.
But one of the things I realized and recognized for myself is that I had a greater desire to work out, to take better care of myself. So physically, change my eating habits, a number of different things. Primarily, and I think what initiated was because it was something that I encouraged him to do in order for him to prepare himself to play football. And so when his life was taken unexpectedly, tragically, and for me going through that loss, I think, somehow had that effect on me where I wanted to participate in those things I had encouraged him to do. And so it's been something that, as a matter of fact, my last conversation with Eric was about that very thing, that I had lost 20 pounds, 25 pounds, over the past 3 years and been able to keep it off. My health has gotten better, running 2 miles a couple times a week, 3 times a week. And then I find myself being more engaged in the social ills of our people. And I find my mind being drawn into those areas where I recognize the injustice that happened to me. And then because of my experiences in it, I've reached out to try to share that with other people. And so the involvement in the election stuff and things I've tried to share when I do speak or have been at some of the rallies and whatnot, it's from personal experience, but it's because I see this something that is affecting us all. So me losing my son was not just me, but it's our entire community. It's our entire society that have lost these people, just like we all feel the loss of Eric, a king in our community. And I wanted the doctor to touch on how exercise, as you mentioned, increases that serotonin and then sort of offsets what could be a depressing state.
All right, we're going to let him respond. Thank you for listening and calling, and we'll get your question answered. Either one of the doctors. How exercise, the benefits of exercise increases serotonin.
Well, I want to tell Brother Stingley that I love you. I had him on my show, and I remember when he was talking how much strength he gave me, seeing how courageous and strong he could be during a difficult time. And so what he says, though, is absolutely true as far as the exercise, because not only does it increase, your serotonin and your dopamine levels, what it does is it reduces that cortisol level, which is that high stress level. So when we start talking about exercise being good, Iyanla talked about it as far as that motion. The first caller, I can't remember his name. He was saying the man's body was made to move. It was made to be in motion. And so what we want to do is to continue to see what we were made to do. And the more you do what you're built to do, obviously, the better you're going to have on it. So when we say exercise, also tell people on that opposite end to be careful, because sometimes we push our human body to some crazy limits where we're doing stuff that we're not supposed to do. So we want to be very, very careful in that respect when we're working out, that we don't overdo it too, because sometimes a good thing can become a bad thing if we don't do it responsibly.
Now, women tend to be sad and emotional when they have depression. Men who are depressed, on the other hand, may be irritable, aggressive, and sometimes hostile. So those are some of the differences, but let's go to resources because it's really important. We have about 5 minutes left on the show, and we want to make sure that people know where they can go and what they can do to support themselves and to support their families. First of all, there is a national suicide prevention hotline, and you can call 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-TALK. You always have the option of going to your doctor, to a therapist, to your spiritual counselor or advisor, your pastor. Talk to your mate, talk to your children. And you know what? We have to talk to ourselves too. Yes.
Another resource, especially for people, if you have a job, every job usually has something called the EAP. It's called an Employee Assistance Program. Yeah. And what you want to do is contact your human resource director and talk to them because they will have free services from somebody who has a license, who are clinically licensed to be able to help you with this. They can do short-term brief therapy, and they can also direct you to someplace else where if you need some more longer services. So if you're inside of a business, recognize that is something that most employers have for you.
The Counseling and Wellness Clinic at the Social Development Commission, primarily for young people between the ages of 9 and adolescents and young adults to 21. The number is 906-2793 and 906-2794. And also the National Association for Mental Illness locally here is a terrific support. Brenda Wesley has a play that's called Pieces.
Yes.
And we will, at the Social Development Commission, be hosting that play sometime in the last quarter of this year, and there's more to come on that. It will be on our website in another few weeks or so.
And again, that's NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness.
National Alliance of Mental Illness.
National Alliance.
So we'll have to get that number so that we can give it over the air. Folks want to contact NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness.
And if you have a computer, you can just type in NAMI, and it'll direct you through the internet if you have those resources at your fingertips.
And also the federally qualified health centers, such as the Milwaukee Health Centers, they have licensed counselors on site and a very large counseling center.
NAMI's phone number is 414-344-0447 for our elderly folks or individuals who may not have a computer or a cell phone, but you got that phone, that landline. You can pick up the phone and call 414-344-0447. That's National Alliance of Mental Illness. Now, we're going to close out this segment, but I guess we talked about resources. I'm thinking about when the seasons change, I change.
Yes.
Sad.
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yes. Seasonal affective disorder. Now, how is that different from depression?
Well, no, I mean, what we do is, especially like when we think about Wisconsin, we kind of say it jokingly, say, oh, I got a Wisconsin body, I got a winter body, because when it gets wintertime, you know what, it get cold, it get darker quicker, so we become more sedentary. When it becomes summertime, it's getting summer because you say, oh, look at them right now. You see the shorts getting closer, everybody want to get in the gym, you want to eat right because now you can, show off a little something. But when we talk about seasonal affective disorder, it's even about the sunlight. When you don't have as much sunlight, which is natural vitamin D, which most people are very, very low on, that's something you want to check on with your doctor. Those things reduces our body. We talked about those serotonin levels. Those are all of those things that give us that ability to live, to want that high quality of life, to be grateful. Sometimes with seasons also comes other emotions. So we talk about triggering things. Sometimes it could be a season where somebody did pass away, and it is during a particular season, right. And that puts us back.
Holidays, yeah.
We talk about holiday triggering different things because you say, you know what, I don't have my family who's here. It's not the same. It's so many different things that can trigger it. So what you want to do, I'm a big fan of journaling. And when you journal, you can kind of get an idea of what are those seasons, what are those days where you say, you know what, man, for the past 3 years, it's kind of funny because you look on Facebook, they have these kind of, where were you at last year or for the last 4 days, these memories in these days. And certain things pop up and you say, wow, I'm always sad around this day. And I see why. This is what I'm thinking about. So when we start thinking about what we can do, those are some of the things. Journaling, figuring out what could be your trigger times and seasons.
Now, this has been a very interesting conversation. We can take one more caller if you would like to ask the doctors a question, or Ella. You can call 414-444-5250. We have about 4 more minutes. So if you would like to ask a question, we ask that you pick up the phone now and call. And I just want to say thank you all for being here this morning, as we honor our friend and our mentor and our brother, Eric Vaughn, and having this conversation. Hopefully this won't be the last conversation that we have, the black media is powerful, to get a message out to reach folks. And so we really strongly encourage, whether it's print, radio, television, that we begin to have this conversation on a more regular basis so it's not so uncomfortable, so it can become common, because, again, it's hurting us, it's killing us. We're not talking about our health. We're not talking about diabetes management, or we're not talking about symptoms of breast cancer or prostate cancer. Ignorance, as they say, is costly. It can kill you. So we have to have the conversations, no matter how sensitive those conversations are. We have a caller on the Eric Vaughn Show. Caller, you have a quick question or comment?
It's just a comment. The Alzheimer's Association also has 24-hour counselors for caregivers and for family members of those affected by Alzheimer's and dementia.
Thank you for sharing that important information. Dr. Smith.
Two things I want to say as I kind of give my closing things. One, if you see people doing drugs, specifically marijuana, things of that nature, we don't want to be so bad on them, because sometimes that's a sign that they need help, because there are some medicinal purposes in these things, but we want to help them to have something that is very good, that has the alter thing. So when you see people who are doing things that seemingly seem counterproductive to life, that may be their way to cope, and a red flag. And the second thing is, the caller just alluded to it, for all of those people who help, so I'm talking about for us in this room, it's very important that the helpers take care of themselves so we can continue to help. So oftentimes you think about helping others, but we forget about ourselves. So make sure that self-care is so important for those, especially for those who help out so many others on a regular basis.
And given that black men are more likely to suffer from higher rates of disease and chronic illness such as prostate cancer, diabetes, and heart disease than their white counterparts, we are encouraging you to connect with some of the centers or clinics that Dr. Davidson's talked about. And we also, what were the addresses of those clinics?
I certainly want you to come to the Northwest Health Center at 7630 West Mill Road tomorrow from 10 to 4 o'clock. We have our open house for families. And all of these different activities, services, and education, you can get that firsthand. You'll even get a chance to meet me and see what I look like. The other health centers include the Keenan Health Center near 36th and Fond du Lac, and you have the Southside Health Center near 23rd in Mitchell. All of these are on the bus line, and the services have no charge. And if anyone is interested in smoking cessation, give us a call, 286-6756. And we have smoking cessation classes that are starting. They will be in a series of 8 classes, and there's going to be more than one session. Get your name on the list if you really are serious and motivated.
Jay, I want to give appreciation to Mr. J.C. Frazier, because he just called and said he would like to pass his time right now on to you all, because this conversation is very important, and he'd like you to keep on with the conversation until time is up.
Thank you, Mr. J.C. Frazier, who is also a pillar in our community. We just want to say thank you for all that you do. Takes really good care of us when it's time for us to go on and transition to the other side. He takes care of this temple. I've seen his work, and thank you for allowing us to expand this conversation. Northwest Funeral Chapel. Thank you. So let's go back to this suicide. But before we go back to suicide, let me give you some more clinics that you can go to. We have resources in our community. Bread of Healing. Their phone number is 414-977-0001. Angel of Hope. 414-647-7466. Outreach Community Health Centers right here on 2nd and Capitol Drive, 414-727-6320. They provide outpatient health care for all age groups. Preventive care through annual physicals and routine care, immunizations, diabetes and chronic disease management, and routine dental care. No one is turned away because of their inability to pay for services. That's important. Now, you all off air was talking something about children and dental care, and I said you were having this really rich, and he said we're priming, so talk about that.
Well, we're talking about preventative again with the medical field. And so we're saying what we want to do is normalize it. So when I talk with dentists, they say a lot of ways that they find out issues with people is through the mouth. That's where a lot of the things start. When you go through with the gum disease and everything else, it shoots in with the nerve. So I was really amazed about that. But if we could get our children in, just going to the dentist for preventative, we're just going to clean your teeth. It's nothing. Makes you feel good, makes you look good. That's 2 times out the year. You go in for eye vision, get your eyes screened, all of those little things. Going in to a regular physician where you you just get a regular checkup. Those are the things what we want to do to introduce them. When we talk about men not going, oftentimes we don't do that until, like what Daryl said, until it's way too late, where it's like it's something that we have to fix, and then it's result oriented. What we want to do is to get in our mindset that it's about proactive. It's about doing it. It doesn't have to be to fix something, but to keep something before going. We talked about the water hose analogy. We look at it like a car. If you get that maintenance done all of the time, you have less trouble with that car. So get that oil check. Do all of those little bitty things beforehand, and if we can instill it into our young boys, especially our young black boys, that's going to help them down the line as far as being more comfortable establishing that relationship that makes it a bit easier to go into a place that's normally uncomfortable.
We have a caller on the Eric Von Show. Caller, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I have a question. Great show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed the topic. Now, the guest that you had on the other day, I might not be pronouncing her name correct.
So let's say it together, Milwaukee. Iyanla.
Iyanla.
There you go.
Yeah. Now, I know she's supposed to be coming to the city of Milwaukee sometime in December.
Yes, sir.
Do you have the date or?
No, I can't make that public right now, but you can call me on my cell number, and I will get information to you, 414.
Hold on a second. I got to grab it.
She will be in Fresh Start Soul Cafe in the early part of December. We are finalizing those details as we speak. And the topic will be From Tragedy to Triumph. She's going to be dealing a series with women called Phenomenal Women, Healing from the Inside Out. And then she's going to do a session for men only, and that's going to be The Spirit of a Man. And the final session is From Tragedy to Triumph, Healing Family Pathologies. So you don't want to miss it. It will be a 4-day event on a Saturday, and you give me a call at 414-333-3372. Okay. All right. So I want to go back to this suicide piece, and thank you for calling. Thank you for listening. According to Dr. Waldo E. Johnson Jr., young black men suffer from much higher rates of depression because of trauma compared to their white counterparts. And many black men fail to recognize that they have been traumatized. My question is, how does a person become desensitized to trauma, stress, or even depression? Dr. Smith, talk to me.
Because it happens all the time.
It becomes normal.
Yeah, it's normalized pathology. And we do know we've been traumatized. We talk about all the time, when we talk about sexual assault, we mostly talk about our girls. The number of young men, of young boys who are sexually assaulted is ridiculously high. But because of all of the connotations, they never say anything. And so when we start talking about, we were talking about ACE studies, the adverse childhood experiences, all of these different traumatic things, all of these different emotional insults that can happen to a person.
So what is the ACE study? Because some people don't know what the ACE study is.
Well, it's adverse childhood experiences, and basically what it is, in 1997, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente with Dr. Falidi Ananda, they wanted to look and see what made people have these long or shorter lives and whatnot like that. And what they did is they looked at emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental health in the family, separation of the family, be it divorce, prison, things of that nature. And you had a 10-point questionnaire. In fact, you can go on to, if you put up ACE score survey, ACE score, questionnaire, you can go on the internet. It's a 10 questions. You can answer real quick. Anybody who had 4 or more now had their life longevity decrease significantly. So these are people who had medical issues, mental health issues, higher rates of suicide, and it was because what I talked about before, they had this I want to say negative effects of ways of trying to help with themselves. So they were trying to do something to help, but it was counterproductive. So now you add on these, and this study was done with about 17,000 people, with middle-class white people who had college degrees, access to medical insurance and whatnot like that. So now you bring that into an urban population where there's other insults that happen, and we talk about complex where it happens multiply and not having the resources to deal with it. Well, now we act out aggressively. Now we don't have those attachments, and now we start talking about that deep hopelessness, which leads to the chronic depression, which leads, unfortunately, to the suicidal or thanatos-like behavior.
And
Dr. Smith,
also, I did want to share, and this is, again, a public health perspective on it, because we look at what we're calling social determinants of health. We do take a look at the same studies, and here's what we know. People will say, well, this runs in my family. Well, if you really are studying it, it's running in your neighborhood. It's running in this part of the city.
Right.
So that's what Dr. Smith is emphasizing here. It's no longer this is an individual situation. It's a pattern of behavior or activity that you're seeing as the same reaction.
We got to transition out because we have Sherwin Hughes is going to be coming on next in less than a minute. But let me say this. We're going to continue this conversation on Fresh Start Today next Wednesday, a part of our 7-part series entitled Family Secrets. And Dr. Ramell Smith, as well as Dr. Starlett Patterson-Biddle, will be talking about mental illness, shame, and suicide in the black family. And that's at 3 p.m. on next week, Wednesday. Be well and be safe until next time. God bless you, and thank you all for coming on the show today.